changes in demographics can be an opportunity or a threat. One of the things we talk about in this class are the aging workforce. A lot of baby boomers are retiring. So if you're a company, one opportunity might be to build more retirement communities. There's retirement communities going up all over the place close to where I live. It may be a threat if you have a need for talent and a lot of your employees are retiring. You may be challenged to try to hire people, but changes in demographics can affect your personal strategy too. Don't think just about things in your city, in your state, even in your country. Think internationally, because companies around the world can disrupt what we're doing right here in our town or our state. And just think about the overall threats and opportunities that may affect your strategy. Now, another resource that we use on this project is a little video series of like 6 short videos called Trombone Player, a video series by Marcus Buckingham. If you haven't watched those videos, pause this video now and go watch those. There's links posted on the content section of Brightspace, but go watch those now before I talk you through the overview from them, because what I'm getting ready to discuss will not make sense if you haven't watched those videos. So the first thing Buckingham talks about is working in our strengths. And it's sad, but one thing that Buckingham has found is that only about 2 out of 10 people spend most of their time working in an area of strength. Now, none of us get to work in an area of strength 100% of the time, but pretty much all of us can do better than 2 out of 10. And Buckingham goes on to point out a few myths about the things we believe about our strengths. The first myth that Buckingham points out is that as we grow, our personality changes. And the reality is that as we grow, we typically become more of who we already are. In fact, one of the things we talk about when we talk about personality is that personality is a trait. We call it by that term, personality traits, and traits by definition typically don't change. Another myth is that you'll grow most in your area of weaknesses. Not true. We typically grow most in an area of strength. Buckingham also says another myth is that a great team member does whatever it takes to help the team. Not necessarily. It would be more accurate to say that a great team member deliberately volunteers his or her strengths to the team most of the time, because that's the best way for them to add value. Here's an example. This may be too out of date for you, but it works for me. One of the most talented, one of the greatest guitarists from my generation is Eric Clapton, right? Great rock and blues guitarist. He's an incredible guitarist. But it would be a horrible disservice to his fans if we required Clapton to play the drums 20% of the time, maybe play the saxophone 20% of the time, the trumpet 20% of the time. He's a guitarist. He's a great guitarist, and that if I go see Clapton in concert, I want to see him, playing that Stratocaster. I don't want to see him playing other instruments. And the same could be said about us in our jobs, that we deliver the most value and we're the most satisfied when we're operating in an area of strength. Think back to the trombone player wanted videos. How did Buckingham define a strength? Do you remember? He said that a strength isn't just something we're good at, it's something that makes us feel stronger. Let me ask you this too. Who does Buckingham say is the best judge of our strengths? Well, we are, right? Nobody else can tell you what energizes you and makes you come alive. You're the best judge of your own strengths. So ask yourself, when was the last time in the past week or so when you were in the zone? Remember when in the previous slide we talked about being in the zone, operating in your sweet spot? What were you doing the last time you felt that good? Was there a time in the last week when you finished an activity and you actually felt energized by it? You felt even more powerful? I want to challenge you. Try to write 2 or 3 sentences that begin with the phrase, I feel strong when I do what? What is it that makes you feel stronger? And then ask yourself, are your strengths central to your week at work? What are the common themes when you look at the answers to those questions? Do they tend to be projects where you're working alone, very focused and intentional? Do they tend to be projects where you're leading a team? Do they tend to be projects where you're brainstorming, innovating? You'll see typically some themes around the things that make you come alive, that actually make you feel stronger. Now, it probably doesn't make sense to try to move cold turkey to work in 100% of the time of our strengths. That's not going to happen. Most of us don't work in jobs where we can work only in our strengths. It reminded me of a book that John Acuff wrote called Quitter. And in that book, Acuff talks about closing the gap between our day job and our dream job. And the first thing that Acuff writes in the very first chapter is, don't quit your day job yet. For most of us, moving towards working our strengths is going to be a gradual process. We're going to have to make small adjustments each week, small shifts in our focus, and small changes in where we spend our time. And these are some questions that Buckingham encourages us to use to analyze how we do that. Think about what we're paid to do. Think about what we love most about using our strengths. What situations draw the very best from you, bring out the best in you? Who do you know that's even better than you at those strengths? Think about are there any other skills you can learn to help sharpen your strengths, to make your strengths even better? And then finally, when you think about your strengths, try to come up with 2 actions. What are just 2 simple things you can do this week or this month to leverage your strengths? Now, if we're going to spend more time working in an area of strength, we're going to have to reduce the time that we spend working in areas where we're weak. That just makes sense, right? We all have limited amounts of time. And keep in mind that weaknesses aren't simply things that we aren't very good at. They're activities that leave us feeling weaker. We may actually be good at something, but it just grates on us. We hate doing it, even though we're pretty good at it. So a weakness is something that weakens us, bores us, frustrates us, just generally causes us to feel weaker. And so when you think about the things you do at work each week, what are the activities that you never look forward to? What are the things that bore you to tears? Are there any tasks that you do regularly that frustrate you or leave you feeling unfulfilled? So ask yourself some questions about that. Is that particular task that's a weakness for you critical to your success? Would anyone even notice or care if you stopped doing it? Maybe it's something that was important at one time, but it's not anymore. Maybe it was never important. Or maybe you could delegate that to someone else. Your very weakness could be someone else's strength, and they would love doing it. An example Buckingham gave was to think about your weakness from another perspective. That is, I think the example he gave in the video was the lady that hated doing expense reports. And so she made it into a kind of a contest. Could she do them more quickly or make it kind of a competitive thing to take a different perspective towards it? And finally, just what are 2 actions you can take this week, this month, to cut out or cut back on 1 or 2 weaknesses? You know, it's interesting that we typically don't talk about our weaknesses very much with other people, right? Maybe we do in a superficial way, maybe a little bit in our employee evaluations. I think Buckingham said only 25% of people say they talk about their strengths at work. But even in our performance reviews, we generally don't talk about the activities that made us feel strong, right? We don't talk about what made us, excited us and made us come alive. We just talk about whether we got our tasks, our projects done on time, on budget, not necessarily the things that made us feel stronger. But it's actually important for your organization to know what your strengths are so they can leverage them a bit. So if you think about your company, about your department, can you think of one person that you could talk to about your strengths, that you could have confidence in sharing with that person? Do you trust that person to talk about your weaknesses? It's one thing to talk about strengths, but sometimes it's a little more awkward to talk about our weaknesses and go, oh, I just absolutely hate doing X. And think about how it might be helpful for this other person to be aware of your weaknesses. They may be able to help you figure out a strategy to minimize your weaknesses and leverage your strengths. So here's the reality. Even if you figure out your strengths, you definitely know the things that make you feel stronger, that make you come alive, for the rest of your life, you're going to face temptations to stray from working in your strengths. The problem is there's lots of great projects, there's lots of great causes, and they may not necessarily allow us the opportunity to work in our strengths. They may be great projects, but not an area of strength for us. The other thing is sometimes we're assigned to projects or tasks at work that are in an area of weaknesses, and we just can't get out of them. So here's some things to keep in mind. First of all, you've always known what brings out the best in you, what the best part of you is. Trust it, believe it. The other thing you need to know is nobody wants you to stay on your strengths path more than you. You've got to own that. You've got to just decide that you're going to be responsible for keeping your path. It's not your boss's job to keep you working in your strengths. It's not HR's job to keep you working in your strength. It's your responsibility. The other thing to keep in mind is we all stray off our strengths path at some time. We all get off track. It's going to happen. So just be aware of what the signs are when you get out off the path of working on your strengths, right? You'll be more frustrated. You'll be more tired. You may become discouraged. And so when you get off the path, just look for how you can get back on to working in an area of strength as soon as you can. Think about what will be your greatest contribution to living a life of working in your strengths. So how do you know your strengths? Well, first of all, you probably just kind of have a pretty good idea. But one thing you can do is think about the tasks that you perform that make you feel stronger, that make you feel like you're in the zone. You can look back at your previous performance reviews at work, but keep in mind that just looking for tasks that you are good at doesn't mean it's a strength. You're actually looking for those tasks that empowered you and made you come alive. Think about the things that people tell you you're good at, but also that energized you. Another good tool are personality tests. I've pasted, I know you can't read these, it's an eye test, but you don't need to read them. But these are just the results of different personality tests that I've taken over the years, including the Belle Isle Colors test, Drake P3, Hogan assessments. There's lots of free personality tests on the internet. These examples aren't necessarily free, but you can find some on the internet. And you can go out there and take those tests. And again, it's not necessarily to tell you what you're good at. It's to remind you of the things that align with your personality, that align with who you are. But just remember, regardless of what tools you use to determine your strength, nobody is better equipped to judge your strengths than you are. Okay, so after you've performed your personal SWOT analysis, you can decide based on your personal vision, that is, your values, purpose, and mission, and considering your personal strengths and weaknesses, what objectives would help you accomplish your mission in the next 5 to 15 years, right? Remember, the whole idea behind mission is that big, hairy, audacious goal that we want to accomplish in the next 5 to 15 years. Now, what objectives help us eat that elephant, help us break it down, and if we were to accomplish all of these objectives, would ensure that we achieve our mission by our targeted date. Now, you may break it down into professional objectives, personal or family objectives. You may have some objectives around health or fitnesses. You may have some objectives around your charity, your church, your synagogue, your mosque, whatever. But think about what objectives you need to accomplish your mission in the next 5 to 15 years. And you may want to break it down into these are the things the first year, these are the things 3 years or 5 years out, to break it into different buckets. As you're setting your goals, remember, and we'll talk about this later in the semester, about the elements of an effective goal. And you've probably all heard of the term SMART goals, but basically your objective should be specific, it should be measurable, it should be attainable, it should be results-oriented, and it should be time-bound. If your objective doesn't meet each one of those, then it reduces the likelihood that you're going to achieve your goal. So, for example, maybe you have an objective to become healthier. Okay, What do you mean healthier? What do you mean by healthier? Does that mean lose 20 pounds? Does it mean get in a cardio workout 4 times a week? Does healthier mean lowering your blood pressure or cholesterol by a specific amount? How much? By what date are you going to target accomplishing your goal? You have to be specific. Now, one thing I've found that increases the probability of our success is to create an action plan for each objective. If you have experience in process excellence or Six Sigma, these project management terms may look familiar to you. But list out your specific objectives and ask yourself if it meets the requirements of a SMART goal in the previous slide. Then define the roles of the people that are necessary for you to be a success. Now, I refer to these, and they're generally referred to as defining the grippy and the daisy. That is, what's the goal? Right? That's the G in the grippy. What roles are necessary to accomplish your objective? What processes are you going to use to accomplish your objective? What interpersonal considerations are there? And then when you think about the roles necessary to accomplish your objective, who's the driver? You're always going to be the driver of your own personal strategy. But there may be other approvers, right? Other people that have to sign off on your objectives. When I went back to get my PhD late in life, I needed the buy-in of my wife because it was going to put a tremendous load on her at home for me to basically be absent for 3 years while I worked on my PhD. It required the approval of my boss where I worked because there were certain days and times I was going to have to be away from work to work on my PhD. There may be certain people that, by what they contribute to the process, increase your likelihood of success. Who do you need to be on board to help contribute expertise or advice to making you more successful? And who needs to be informed? Again, using the example of when I got my PhD, I told my family, listen, I'm not going to be attending a lot of family reunions and events and that type of thing for the next 3 years, but once I finish my degree, I'll be done. So I didn't want them to be offended that I was turning down all their invitations to come over for dinner, right? People may need to be informed of your action plans in order to increase your success. All right. So if you think back to the rainbow colored pyramid that represents all the different components of a strategic plan, the capstone, the top, the very last element is a measurement system. We all need some type of system in place that will tell us if we're on track to reach our goal on time and to notify us when we get off track or off schedule. It's an old management cliche, but it's true. You have to inspect what you expect. Also, don't forget to reward yourself as you reach significant milestones. The goal that you're striving for might in and of itself be reward enough, but it can be a great motivator if you say, when we accomplish this particular goal, we're going to go on a trip, or we're going to, buy something significant or do something nice for yourself. Here's what we know: what's measured and rewarded improves. That's just a fact. So that's basically the overview of the assignment you're going to go through. That's basically the overview of the assignment you're going to go through to work on this project. Now, in the next little segment of this video, I am going to give you a little personal example that I think will help it may make more sense to you. So hang in there. We're about to finish this, and you can get started on your own personal strategy.